Thank you so much and welcome all of you for joining this very special webinar on media engagement. Of course, it's been a topic which is at the top of our mind all the time, but I think it's the first time that we're all coming together as a group and discussing this on a large platform. So I really hope that it will be productive and useful, and we can come out with not only put the issue on the table, but also arrive at perhaps takeaways and solutions which we can apply in the short term and long term. Nobody's saying this is going to be solved overnight, but I hope we can, set up some best practices and learnings from each other. This is a very participative kind of seminar, so we hope that all our speakers, of course, are going to set the context, and they are going to introduce the topic according to their points of view, and we do have a very good range of points of view. But it's also very participative, so do send your questions through chat. If you would like to ask a question live, tell us. We are there to listen, to learn from each other. So with that, we're going to keep our introductions short and snappy. So just quickly, I'm going to introduce the entire panel. We have, of course, Paarul from SoftBank. We have Nikhil from Shandwick. We have Prasanto, who's a policy consultant and tech writer, a well-known face to those who cover the technology sector and pitched for the stories there. We have Subhash Pais, who's the head of business impact for the Swamy media group, and of course Nitin Mantri, who wears three hats, the PRCAI hat, the ICCO hat, and of course Avian WE. Really pleased, and we're waiting for Minari from Amazon, who will be joining us shortly. Thank you. With that, I'd like to throw the panel open and first come to Paroma first. Paroma, could you, in your usual sharp way, help us set the context for why we are having this discussion right now, and why is it important to finally try and come to grips with this ongoing issue of media engagement?
I try to do it in not so sharp way. So it's very, very nice to see all of you, all the industry colleagues and my co-panelists. Thanks for joining and making the time. So just for context, this action attracted obviously a lot of attention. And it's basically about pitching a sensitive topic intelligently and without perhaps consulting the client. Without going into the client part, what I would say is that it's very, very important to understand the context, the industry context, the profile of your client, and particularly the outlet or the person you are going to engage with. Unless and until you understand, you have enough intelligence about the environment in which you're working, it's very difficult to make a pitch that will connect and that will work. I'll give you again a short example. I was talking to a friend of, actually he sent this to me, a very senior BBC journalist who's a close friend, who sends this thread to me that a young PR executive is pitching a story to him. And he very politely said that, no, this is not of interest to us. You should please read up on what the kind of stories BBC covers. And then she told him on WhatsApp that how much will you take to publish this? Now, my friend is an extremely polite person. He did not want to out her, etc. But he just sent it to me as an example. So this kind of thing, it comes back to the question of intelligence and knowledge. Please be informed about your environment, your profile of your client, and the outlet of the person you're engaging with. If you're engaging with BBC, you must know what BBC is all about. BBC is not Bombay Times or Bangalore Mirror. So intelligence and information, where does that come from? Reading primarily. Something sadly with many people, particularly younger people, have forgotten to do. I don't care whether it's you read on digital, you read on print, you read on a device, please do read. Please do talk to people. Talk to your peers, talk to your seniors, as to know, equip yourself with enough intelligence and knowledge so that you can do your job well. There is no going away from plain old-fashioned reading and asking and engaging with your stakeholders and peers. The second thing, even more important, I would say, sensitivity. Particularly when you're exploring a topic which is sensitive. which is, in this case, it was mental illness. It could be a physical illness like anorexia, which has its roots in mental illness, bulimia, skin color, racism, many sensitive topics which require deft handling. What do I mean by deft handling? I mean, again, empathy and understanding to see how best this message can be conveyed. In what way, using what kind of medium. And this also happens to an extent with experience. But unless and until you develop an understanding, you won't be able to do this, particularly categories like these, healthcare, public service, and all the things that I've mentioned. I have seen many examples of this when I was a journalist, and even later. Opportunistic is always not the best way. Instantaneous is also not always the best and the most effective communication. It needs to be thoughtful. Engaging with empathy and intelligence means you are thoughtful, you are considerate, you are intelligent, and thereby you are effective. I would just keep to this and request Nikhil to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Paroma. Nikhil, we've often had discussions about various issues around mental health. You, of course, been writing this great column for Repetition today for weeks now about various aspects of just staying in the moment. And flowing from that, what is your take on what are the stresses of media engagement and how do we learn from them?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Paarul, and great to get a chance to share my thinking. At the heart of this, I'm firmly convinced that psychological safety of an employee is a root cause for many of these problems, right? So there are three linked thoughts I want to bring to the table today. One is psychological safety. The next is the onus on organizations like agencies, like PR agencies, to train their staff. But I think equally the onus of every team member, of every PR professional, to know when to ask for help. So I'm going to talk about these three, and hopefully through that share my point of view. So starting with psychological safety. What is psychological safety? Psychological safety is the extent to which a person feels comfortable speaking their mind in the workplace, right? And when you don't feel comfortable, when you feel that you're under attack, when you feel that you're ill-equipped to handle a situation, is when you feel anxiety or fear. And that anxiety or fear results in our good old fight or flight. Oftentimes, we do and make the silliest, stupidest mistakes when we are operating from a place of anxiety or fear. So I think providing a psychologically safe environment links to the need for organizational culture, which is about, I guess, promoting some behaviors and inhibiting some other behaviors. So the question as leaders we have to ask ourselves is, who are we promoting? What are we promoting in our own firms? And does it create an environment where I call a kid and I say, I don't care how you do it. You just bloody well get it done. Okay, I don't care. I'm under a lot of pressure from the client. You just have to do it. Or do I call him or her and say, you know what? Tell me where you're stuck. Let's figure out how to crack this. Right? So it's a very different tone that you can set. And the pressure is there. We're all under pressure. But that is where I think the culture part comes in and the psychological safety part comes in. A big part of institutionalizing this is creating a training environment, a training calendar, where you are creating a safe space for kids or even not kids, for senior folks to come and say, hey, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. Can we figure this out? So for example, one of the things we are doing right now is we have a bunch of ex-journalists who work with us, and we've got them online like this, where we host a weekly sort of edit get-together, where people bring their problems in. And the rule is there are no stupid questions. Ask the stupid questions and do a lot of role play. Don't give theory. Say, okay, pitch it to me. Tell me where you're stuck. Let's role play this. So I think that's really giving some beginnings of answers. But let's, for example, say that that training didn't happen this week. Does that give anybody license to do something that is getting called out as poor etiquette in media? I think that's where asking for help comes in. And I'm pleasantly surprised. On LinkedIn last week, I got somebody who pinged me, a young PR professional, saying, "Hey, I'm stuck with a pitch. Would you mind helping me?" I was like, okay, that's new, but yeah, sure. Let's try and figure this out. So I think smart people will find help. I was stuck with a pitch, right? And I called a journalist friend saying, I am stuck here. How do you think I can go about this? So asking for help, I think, is a really smart thing that you can do. So yeah, just recapping that, create a psychological safe environment through the culture you're building, train. And as a person who's working in an organization, let's say you don't have training or you're not feeling psychologically safe, go outside, find an ecosystem that you can ask for help. And I think that's part of the way through, knowing that you need to ask for help.
Thank you, Nikhil. Those are very important points, and we hope to take questions on that later as well. I'd like to welcome Minari. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. We wouldn't have wanted to do this without you, so welcome. Minari, when we were speaking in the run-up to the panel, we talked a lot about the other side and how do journalists behave. They come ill-prepared for meetings sometimes. There's a lot of things are misquoted. So there are two sides, very clear two sides to the issues. The other thing is the client ownership of what is going out. I know you have very strong views on both these issues, so over to you.
Yeah, I think, thanks Paarul, and I think some very good points made by Paroma as well as Nikhil. And I think it's all kind of a continuum of these different points. First of all, I think all of us as PR teams are the brand custodians. I think sometimes it's forgotten that when we own the brand reputation, that's not just about a story that we're pitching or what we're saying, but how we pitch, what we do. Every single component of how we engage is a part of that brand ownership. And I think it's important, therefore, to remember that every single thing we say, and that includes off-record conversations, comes back to what the brand stands for and who the brand is and how we behave. So as a part of that, it's absolutely necessary.
So I think, Gulshan, you have your mic on. You need to go on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Nikhil. So I think it's absolutely important to have the right processes and mechanisms in place. Now, most of the times I would like to think that my agency is my partner in all the work that I do, especially as we do really large works. I don't think it's about client and agency. I think we should be differentiating ourselves through that. And therefore, what we're really talking about is this single PR team, which owns the brand reputation. And do we have the right processes and mechanisms? Some of it could be, like Nikhil rightly said, about training, especially those coming in new into PR. But sometimes, and again, good point about, we get stuck. There's a point in time, I had a really difficult decision to make in one of my previous companies where we were about to launch a car. And literally, within days, with days left, and this was to be at an auto expo, the Zika virus, had an outbreak. And we had already test driven the car. The reviews were in with the name called Zika. And then we were going into the auto expo. And these are difficult situations. What were the sensitivities of it? Do we launch? How do people perceive? And so I reached out to a few people I trust in the industry to kind of brainstorm through them and just say, hey, what do you think about it? And I think and these were my peers. And I think trusting people, reaching out is absolutely essential. I think that's a very important part of what we do, and having the right processes. Having said all that, the truth of the matter is mistakes will happen. I don't think any of us go through without that, oh, damn moment. When something went wrong, in hindsight, we all know we shouldn't have done it. Someone did something wrong. It doesn't matter who and what and where at that moment. The first part is to, acknowledge that mistake that might have happened. Having said that, you acknowledge that moment. It's important that we see that we're all a team and we behave as a team with a lot of sensitivity to the issue. So acknowledge there was a mistake made and say that we're going to look into it, depending on how public or what's the kind of mistake. If you take the example that was being discussed at the beginning of this conversation, vis-a-vis there could be other kinds of situations, but figure out where did the slip up happen? Where did the process fail? Where did the mechanism go wrong? Who really had the ownership where something slipped up? And then internally one can decide whatever, depending on the situation, are the right steps needed to correct that, rather than behaving in a very quick fashion. But the final point that you referred to, Paarul, yes, I do think there are times, between us as the PR community, and I used to be on the other side of the table as a journalist, rather than recognizing that we lean into each other so often for so many things, we sometimes seem to behave as if there's some kind of a natural antagonism between the two. And that sometimes creates a culture of naming and shaming, which is unfortunate, because I think, like I said, mistakes happen on all sides. Everyone has stories on every side of it. I have stories from my journalism days. I'm married to a journalist. There are stories now as a PR person. But I think we need to recognize that you can't generalize these two industries. These are different people, different situations, different points. And either we find a constructive way to reach out and tell, or at most we might have a chuckle when we are, in a smaller group. So I would rest at that and pass it on to Nitin.
Thank you. Thank you, Minari. Those very important points you raised about client ownership, which gives me the perfect segue to Nitin. Welcome, Nitin. Nitin, the PRCAI has also released a media advisory today. I hope to discuss that later as well. But Nitin, as PRCAI, what is your call on what is the take when incidents like these happen, and what can be done to make PR professionals feel safe? When they call up journalists and get yelled at.
Thanks, Paarul, and thank you for everybody for joining. And thanks, Paarul. It's a very timely topic. As you can see, a lot of interest today. Many people have joined. I think I'm going to take on from what the others have also talked about. I think there are three elements to, three parties to this whole problem, right? There is the client, there is the PR firm, and there is a journalist. And I think all of us have to work together in the larger interest of the brand eventually. You talked about the PRCAI view on this particular topic. To address that upfront, I don't think it, as an association, we don't agree with what happened in that incident, the action taken by the client in this case. And I'm hoping it's not going to set a precedent. One, and two, on Minari's point that naming and shaming, I think that's definitely a no-no. I think we all have access to social media, and it's very easy for us to, in the heat of the moment, to tweet something or write something about somebody and call out people. I think that's wrong. I don't think that's the right way forward. And even if you have to take action, do a thorough investigation and take action privately. You don't have to make a public show of that. That's definitely the view there on that. And taking on from Nikhil was saying earlier about safety and the impact it's happening on young professionals, I think is very important. I shudder to think the impact on the young professional who probably may or may not have made that mistake, or made that mistake under pressure or whatever reason, right? I'm not going to go into the details of that, but the fact is, it is an important issue. I mean, as an association, we have a group of mentors who are available, and we've seen actually an uptake since the lockdown started of people reaching out to those mentors to speak to them. So that's happening. As a company, we have a open helpline for people to talk to during times of stress, or if they want to discuss something, and that's been taken up as well. It's you'll be surprised how many people get onto that. We don't know, it's confidential, but we do know the kind of issues are being discussed, and it's a very busy helpline. So I think um, but overall, I think the challenge really is that unless we work together, it's not, we both need each other. And I was on the, when we were discussing it yesterday, I quoted this survey which was done last year, pre-COVID time, globally, and I think Asia was part of it. And it's actually said that over 70% of journalists actually said that they do want to work with PR firms and they rely on PR firms, not just for stories, but for information and even for some cases off the record conversations about certain things and certain issues. So it's not that that media and PR firms can't work together. They absolutely can. I think open admission of that would be the first starting point, that we can work together and we need each other, right? I think that's the first starting point in my view.
I think that's a great spotlight on the issue, and it's true. I mean, especially after COVID, with resources for the media becoming restricted than ever, more than ever, it's certainly we need the PR firms. It's a lot of the PR reactions are a legacy issue from political journalism and how they looked at their PR contacts, and then of course liberalization in business journalism brought this relationship up really, and now we are in another phase altogether of the PR journal relationship. With that, I'd like to bring in Subhash. Subhash, you also happen to deal with a lot of young colleagues at your workplace, and I know you've been conducting motivating seminars for them and just trying to make them feel good throughout this whole process. What is your take on this issue, and where do you think we are at with media engagement?
Yeah, hi Paarul. Thanks a lot for this. Thank you also for sort of bringing this subject into the mainstream in this manner. One of the things that I mean, after hearing everybody else, two things that sort of come to my mind. One is that the PR industry itself is a very multi-tiered industry. I mean, we're talking about an industry that basically does not have any entry barriers, and we're looking at agencies, the top-rung agencies, which are basically a few, anywhere between 8 to 10 of them. We are then talking about mid-sized agencies comprising of anywhere between 15 to 50 people, perhaps. And we're talking about agencies right at the bottom of the rung, which sort of have, let's say, not more than 3 to 5 people. And it is a bit unfortunate that when incidents like the one that happened last Sunday sort of ends up clubbing the entire industry in sort of in that very same light. Coming back to agencies and the industry, we now need to actually look at what our basic cultures are. Each and every agency sort of has they have varying subtleties as far as their culture is concerned. And within that culture, where does learning or, where does training fit in? And the one thing that I've seen over the last 15 years, since I got into the industry, was that I was the product of quite a lot of formal training. I did not come from a PR background, but the agency itself had, a lot of formal training sessions. And that sort of, helped me a lot. That sort of, helped me get on board and understand the ethos and pathos of the industry and the way to deal with journalists, which is something I still use after 15 years. I mean, I still have conversations one-on-one with journalists. I still have conversations one-on-one with editors, and it has always served me, that education has always served me very well. The second tier of this is, what exactly is the culture within your teams, and that is where I believe that youngsters actually accentuate their learning. Being within that team dynamic, does a youngster feel protected? And as I think Nikhil mentioned, the psychology part of it, does a youngster feel safe in coming on board and voicing his opinion, whether it's right, wrong, stupid, etc. And that is also where a lot of training happens. When you sit with seniors who have gone through all that you have gone through and who have made the mistakes that you have made, them, then telling you, why don't you do this a little bit differently? Because when I did it, this is how I fell flat. Or, when I did it this way, I was very, very successful. Why don't you try this out? So I've seen that, training actually happens, much more richer training actually happens there as well. So formal training has absolutely improved over the years, over the last 15 years or so. Earlier, we used to, train within an agency. Now you have external trainers. People like you and Moshmi, Paarul and Moshmi are actually also doing a great job on that front. You also have a lot of, e-learning portals that teach you a lot of the basics. So basic training, I think, as far as formal training is concerned, it's there. What I feel is lacking is the, in-team dynamic, so to speak. And I think that is what agencies should look to cultivate. That is what team leaders are there for. You are meant to cultivate an atmosphere where you have something called as a flat team, where everybody feels like an equal stakeholder in the client as well as within the team, and where everybody, no one is afraid in asking a question. The moment that happens, I believe that things get much better, and incidents like the one that happened last Sunday can be avoided. Sorry, if you could just repeat the second part of your question, Paarul.
I think what you said covers everything, and I'm going to come back to you more.
Great.
And you actually covered, and you made a very important point about having a culture which makes it safe for you to speak. I'm going to now come to Prasanto. Prasanto, a lot of the animosity between journalists and PR professionals are legacy issues between how various topics under journalism were regarded and who was considered, top of the heap in journalism. It was always the political journalists, and then the ministry journalists who were considered top of the heap, and therefore they used to look down on PR professionals, and that from there, that legacy stayed for a bit, but that is now changing drastically. So what are your views? Since you work both sides of the divide, so to speak, and you also work for the dark side, but also very much still a tech writer. So what are your views on how the relationship is evolving? And is it, what do we really do to empathize with the topics that we are pitching? How do we maintain proper empathy for those topics?
Okay, thanks, Paarul. I think quite a bit has been covered. So I'll just try to focus on 2 or 3 things arising out of what you've asked. So, as a former journalist, and, I've been out of mainstream media or the technology media. I was heading this group for 23 years. I was there. It's been more than 5 or 6, maybe 7 years now. I still get a lot of pitches. They're wild. Most of them are mass pitches. Most of them clearly have no idea what I do. They've maybe seen my byline in India Today or somewhere, and, from there, but without really looking at the kind of stories I write. So that's a problem. And I won't get into berating PR folks on that, but I want to just mention this thing that we've mentioned one incident. There have been others like it. I don't know if you watch this the series called Air Crash Investigations. It's one of my favorites. But one of the things there is when the air crash happens, it's not one thing which causes it. It's a series, it's a chain of events. So there was a chain of events here. Okay. And let's look at some of those, that chain of events. Okay. So one is social media. So social media is not a joke. I think a lot of people treat it very, very lightly. But one social media 101 thing is that if you are sending out a message which is not being sent to a very close friend or something, you have to assume that message will be forwarded and maybe published, maybe put out on Twitter, maybe put out on Facebook, whatever. You have to make that assumption. And, if you do that, then you're going to probably step back and ask that, okay, whatever am I sending, is it something that I would like published? Second is, if you look at this question of, pitching correctly, if I found quite a few PR folks actually taking the trouble back then and even now of understanding, what I would write or what others would write. I had 80 journals in my team, understanding quite a few of them, and then come back with, a very specific, clearly not a mass-produced story pitch. Okay, if you do that and it's helpful, and very often they share other things which they think would be helpful for us, which is not related to their client, you build a relationship. These relationships are important because, among many other things, obviously you can get your work done, etc. But if you make a mistake with somebody with whom you have a relationship and there is some degree of respect, there is no way that person is going to tear you apart on social media. So that's, I think, one very crucial thing. And it's not just the junior, I don't know if it was junior PR person or mid-level or whatever, but if there are senior folks there, they need to look at that and see that, what is the relationship established with the people that pitches are being made to. Because, you asked about this tension and this relationship. There is a power asymmetry there. The junior most journalist who comes in with, maybe low competence, low experience. And by the way, journalists they're fairly underpaid. The median pay in journalism would probably be 1/3 of the median pay in your profession in public relations. So it's a mass of people come in. Some of the organizations handle the training well, and the training not just in the core work, but including in relationships, in response, in etiquette. If somebody writes to you, do write back and things like that. But a fair number, and I would say maybe 1/4 of them or 1/3 of them, will be rude. And they'll be rude in various ways, rude by acts of omission, by acts of commission. And, it's a little bit like, not a great comparison, but if you look at the whole call center and BPO business, there's psychological counseling for those people because they get screamed at by customers. Okay, so it's very much part of their training, how to handle dealing from that situation. Somebody's screaming at you. Okay, don't assume the screaming is at you. It's at the company. So, there's a buffer there and things like that. So how to deal with abuse, and that is a backup that's really important. So I really hope that what happens in things like this and what happened in this particular case is not that the PR person was not taken to task or whatever, because, the organization has to stand by that person. But if you look at these 3 or 4 things, assume that what you put on social media will be shared. Okay, your message will be public. So be careful with what you share. And the same thing applies to journalists, by the way. Paroma, you mentioned the BBC. I write a lot for the BBC. I know the kind of restrictions they have on what you can share on social media. The senior most people are not supposed to simply share wild opinions or, criticize people wildly and things like that, if they identify themselves as BBC. And the same applies for quite a few, especially global media houses. A junior person, I mean, whether it's junior or senior or whatever, in a BBC or another news organization, they would really be restricted and restrained from just putting out wild things, because when they identify themselves as a Times of India or Express or whatever, they speak for the organization. So when they do something that causes harm, and this one tweet caused harm, and by the way, my understanding is that person didn't mean it, didn't want that person, the agency, to be sacked, tried to very weakly say that and meekly say that, no, maybe you shouldn't, maybe you should look at training or something like that. Okay, that, I mean, that is something that's a fact on both the media side and on the PR side. And you can take care of these things by this set of things. One, relationships. Make sure that relationships are built and pitches are made to people that you have a relationship with. And the side effect is, if there's a mistake, there's a buffer. Okay, there's a power asymmetry. Journalists be rude, deal with it. Teach the younger folks to deal with it. I think the senior folks are better off in maybe handling it. But sometimes they also have a problem with dealing with a very young journalist who turns out to be very, very rude. And that happens. I mean, I've seen that a lot in my profession. So that's a set of specific points which I thought may not have been covered.
Thank you, Prasanto. I think these are great specific points, which gives me the perfect lead to have one more round of questions. And we have a great audience here. So if you would like to start asking questions, please do start rolling in your questions. We are more than ready to take it. If you would like to ask it yourself or send it on chat, please go ahead. The whole purpose is to interact with all of you. I'd like to now come to Paroma and start off. All of you have raised, have given us an overview and also raised some specific points. I think the audience would be interested in knowing, how do we get, basic as it sounds, how do we get the pitching right, and how do we disassociate yourself from the abuse? And it is abuse. It sounds like a very strong word to use, but the fact is, there is a component of bullying and abuse out there. So starting from Paroma and then to the rest of the panel.
I'd keep it really short because we all want to answer questions. And I mean, I think that a great deliverable on the part of the client also is that please trust your partner. Unless and until you build that trust, it's very, very difficult to get the best out of the relationship. I've had PR partners who have pulled me out of, it was their mistake, but it was a great crisis and we worked together to pull the best out of that situation. Several times it has happened. So I think it's very important, if you're a high profile client, to select your partner well and to really work with them so they can succeed and you can succeed.
I think that's a very important point. And Paroma, earlier you made this point about reading also, which I think we can't stress enough.
Yeah. So really be open to learning. Unless and until you research, and you will never get it right. And research comes from reading, from talking to people, from knowing your environment. Please, please, please research. I still research every journalist I meet, if it's not somebody known. And the other thing is that be open to learning. I'm going to take two names here. If I sit with a Rohit Saran even today, or a Sukumar, they're both my peers, right? We work together. I learn from every encounter. They're amazingly good people. I don't mean that others are not. There are many, many people like that. But please be open to learning from every meeting or every encounter you have, every pitch. And if you're open to learning, they also learn from you. There's a relationship of mutual respect, which is built in peace times, and you can cash in on that at wartime. Best relationships do not get formed in wartime, So I would just say that trust, research, and be open to learning.